Close to 10 years ago, at a rally that I led at Union Square for abortion rights here in New York City, a woman who was just walking by stopped and listened for a while. She came close to the edge of the stage, and I noticed that she was shaking. So I went over and I talked to her. And she told me, through tears, a story that she had held in silence for probably 40 or 50 years. She told me about being 16 years old, growing up in Biloxi, Mississippi, and how her best friend, also 16, found out that she was pregnant. Her best friend, her family was Catholic, and she was so ashamed, and she especially didn't want to tell her father. Now, I want you to remember what it was like to be 16. I want you to picture your best friend. Think about the hopes you had, the dreams for your future. And now think about the isolation, the shame, the terror you would have to feel at 16 to go and rummage through your father's things. Look for where he kept his gun, take it out, point it at your head, and pull the trigger. This is what this woman's best friend did. This is what it means when abortion, legal, safe abortion, is criminalized and not available. And this is not the only story. That year, I traveled the country with other people, organizing people to stand up and fight against the growing, mounting assault on women's fundamental right to abortion. And every single city we went to, every stop we made, starting here in New York City, going all the way through the Midwest, up to Fargo, North Dakota, through South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Texas, every stop we made, women came up and they shared stories like this. A woman in Texas told of holding her best friend as she bled to death after a botched back alley illegal abortion. She told of feeling paralyzed with fear as the life left her best friend's body. Fear that if she went to the hospital, they'd both end up in prison. This woman carries a guilt with her to this day. A guilt that is not on her, it's on this state. A woman from Mexico recounted how, as a teenager, she was gang raped, denied an abortion, and forced to have the child of a rapist she didn't even know which one. She described raising this child as an immigrant, as a domestic worker in Texas, living in the shadows, scrambling to raise her son, and having him look at her and ask her his whole life why she wouldn't talk about his father. She didn't tell her son until he was in his 30s. Think about that. Another woman told the story of lying on a kitchen table in a filthy kitchen while a man she was almost certain was not a doctor molested her. And she laid there and endured it, just hoping that when he was done, he would provide the abortion she came for. Can you imagine being so desperate that you would climb up a dirty, dark staircase and stay and endure a sexual assault in silence because the alternative is worse? This is what it means when women do not have access to safe, legal abortion. And these stories were not just in the past. We heard stories from teenagers in Oklahoma throwing themselves down the stairs to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. We heard stories from women in Jackson, Mississippi drinking Purell, poisoning their bodies, trying to get rid of something that was growing inside of them that would change and shatter their whole lives that they did not want. This was 10 years ago. And in the 10 years between 2011 and 2021, over 500 further abortion restrictions were passed into law. And things have gotten even worse with record restrictions last year. In Texas right now, abortion, there is a near total abortion ban. It has been in effect since last September. I was speaking to a woman, an abortion provider down in Texas a few weeks ago, and she told me, she said, Sunsara, you have no idea the level of atrocity going on down here. And she used that word, atrocity. She talked about girls who were brought into her clinic, victims of rape and incest, and women desperate to terminate their pregnancies they didn't want, who she had to turn away. And you could hear the desperation of these women coming out in this provider's voice. You could hear the tears in her eyes as she shared this. Atrocities. These are things that shatter lives, and they radiate through a lifetime and across the conditions of all women. Now, I want you to think about that. And multiply. Oh, I got another story. Before I go to multiplying, I want to tell another story. I read this story of a woman who was a drug user on the eve of being sentenced to a 5-year prison sentence. And she actually managed to make it to the abortion clinic the day before the Texas restriction went into effect. And she got there, and she was desperate to get the procedure. She already had 3 children at home, and she did not want to have another child in prison. But in Texas, there's a mandatory 24-hour waiting period. And so by the time the waiting period was over, the law was in effect and her procedure was no longer legal. This woman, when she heard this, she dropped to her knees on the cold tile floor in front of the doctor, and she begged. She begged the doctor to do the abortion. Now think about that. I mean, have you ever dropped to your knees in front of total strangers and begged? Think about what has to be going through your life, through your emotions, through your mind to drive you to that. And this woman was turned away. She was not able to get that abortion. And think about the violence of that. Think about the barbarity of that. This is what it means when there is no access to safe, legal abortion. And now I want you to multiply. I want you to multiply that story by 6 million. That's how many women of childbearing age there are in Texas right now who don't have access to meaningful legal abortion. But I don't want you to stop there. Multiply it by 100 million. That's the number that NPR estimated, the number of people in this country who will lose the legal right to abortion overnight if Roe v. Wade is overturned. Something that the Supreme Court of the United States is actively weighing right now. 100 million. If Roe is overturned, more than 20 states already have laws on the books that would immediately ban or severely restrict abortion. 41% of women of childbearing age in this country will lose the nearest abortion clinic. Nearly every state in the South and most of the large parts of the Midwest. Now I want you to think about the women's lives that will be foreclosed, the dreams that will be shattered, the women and girls who will be forced to drop out of school, the women who will be trapped in abusive relations, the women who will be driven into poverty or deeper into poverty. I want you to think of the insult and the humiliation and the isolation and the shame that will be inflicted on women and girls. I want you to think of the fear, no, really the terror, that will hang over the lives of all women and girls, because all of them will know that that could be them. Someone else is controlling your body in its most intimate dimensions. Someone else is controlling the most important life-altering decisions of your life. Someone else can even decide to sacrifice your life for the benefit of something growing within you. And in this case, that someone is the state the laws, the courts, and yes, the prisons, the state, and the supreme decisions that are being made by a pack of fanatical, theocratic Christian fascists on the court. Really think about it. Forced motherhood is female enslavement. Now, sometimes people look at this anti-abortion movement and this whole momentum behind it and they scratch their heads. And they say it doesn't make sense. If they're so pro-life and they're so against abortion, why don't they support birth control and sex education? Or they scratch their heads and say if they care about babies so much, why aren't they helping end poverty and health care and child care? But it makes perfect sense. Because this movement has never been motivated by life. They've never been motivated about concern for babies. They are motivated by the fanatical drive to control and subjugate women. That is their aim. And it does make sense. And they are also about ending birth control. They're out for revenge at all the ways that women have gotten out of place in their view in the last several generations. They want to slam this backwards. And this theocratic movement is aiming for the rights of LGBTQ people, to strip them away and slam them backwards too. If you go outside any abortion clinic anywhere in this country, you will hear them say this straight up. They'll be shaming, harassing, and screaming at women. They say things like, "Wicked women burn in hell. God hates gays." They quote the Bible, one of their favorite passages, women should submit to their husbands as their husbands submit to the Lord. And they recite this prayer, "Lord, please break this curse of independence that has afflicted women." Some of these fascists don't even talk about women. They just refer to host bodies. If you're paying attention, you've heard this in the news, like politicians and mainstream media, host bodies. These people are not going to be satisfied with a patchwork of half the country with the right to abortion and half the country without it. No, they aim for criminalizing all abortions for all women in all circumstances. They aim to send women and those who help them, the doctors, the friends, the family members, anybody else to prison for daring to control their own reproduction. Do you know that just last October, a 21-year-old woman from Oklahoma, a Native American woman, Brittany Pula, was convicted of manslaughter and sent to prison for a miscarriage? This is the future these fascists are fighting for. And Brittany is not alone. The National Advocates for Pregnant Women documented 1,254 cases between 2006 and 2020 in which, quote, being pregnant was a necessary element of the crime or a but-for reason for the coercive punishment action, punitive action taken. I'm talking about arrests, detentions, imprisonment for miscarriages, accusations of self-induced abortions, drug addictions that harmed a fetus, all of this and more. This anti-abortion movement has assassinated 11 abortion providers. It has bombed clinics. It has committed arson. It has committed kidnappings. It has invaded clinics hundreds and hundreds of times. Just on New Year's of this year, a Planned Parenthood in Tennessee was burnt to the ground. And it doesn't even make the news. This is the background violence that's been building and normalized in this society, and it is the future that they are bringing not just to Texas and Mississippi, as unacceptable as that will be. They are bringing it, if they succeed, nationwide. This is a Christian fascist, a theocratic, woman-hating movement. And their assault on abortion is the front edge and a battering ram in an all-around fascist program that is infused with white supremacy, with xenophobic hatred of immigrants, with rabid, lunatic science denialism. And this movement is making advances on every front. This movement cannot be accommodated. It will not be appeased. It will not stop until they achieve victory or until they are defeated. Why is it that Rise Up for Abortion Rights, the organization and movement I initiated recently together with others, why is this the only movement out there that is calling for mass resistance to this? And the big question for us tonight is, what are we? What is each of us, each of you watching here in this room tonight, each of you online, what are each of us going to do to turn this around? One big reason that people are not standing up right now is they are being misled by the so-called leaders of the so-called women's movement. And this has to be called out. These so-called leaders are capitulating in advance. And they're hitting the snooze button and telling everybody else not to be too alarmed. This is what they're doing. Yeah, they dress it up. Some of them say things like, we're teaching women how to induce their own abortions. We're going to spread the abortion pill that you can get through the mail, at least for now, for after Roe falls. Or they say things like, we're raising money to help women travel from one state to another so that they can get abortions when it gets criminalized where they are, for after Roe falls. Or they say things like, and this one really gets me, we're passing proactive legislation to protect abortion in our own local area. You hear this a lot in New York City. I get the emails, good news, we're making advances for after Roe falls. Do you know that the National Institute for Reproductive Health actually put out a report last year that was titled, I can't make this up, Gaining Ground in 2021. They write, despite historic setbacks, states passed more proactive legislation in 2021 than ever before. This momentum must continue, end quote. 2021, the year of the most anti-abortion restrictions passed into law ever before. 2021, the year that Texas obliterated abortion rights for 6 million women of childbearing age. 2021, the year that the fascist-packed Supreme Court considered the abortion ban out of Mississippi that could gut or obliterate abortion rights nationwide and indicated that they were willing and ready to do so. 2021, keep this momentum going? This is so harmful. It is so disorienting. It is so pacifying. It is so dishonest. This is not proactive. This is capitulation with a smiley face put on it. These so-called leaders of the so-called women's movement are so enslaved to this system that they are willing to enslave women. But we must not be. And let's be clear, if people lie down and accept the fall of Roe, how much longer will it be before black people are slammed backwards in the same way? Look at what's already being done by the same fascist-dominated Supreme Court to voting rights. And look right here in this city how they are trying to bring back the terror of stop and frisk and re-intensify racist police terror, yes, with a new face, Eric Adams. This too, if people capitulate, if people bow down, all of this gets accelerated. Now here's another piece of deadly bullshit that's being pushed out by the so-called woke crowd that needs to be called out. A lot of people, you talk about abortion rights, they just have a lot of woke bullshit, and we've taken a lot of it on at revcom.us, and I urge you to go read it. I'm not going to recount all of it tonight. There's more that's been taken on by other people involved in riseuppforabortionrights.org. Go to the website, read about it. But here I want to touch on just one dimension further of this woke bullshit, which is people who say, oh, abortion, now that's a white women's issue. If you're around for 2 minutes in this struggle, you're going to hear that. And this is bullshit. We have to be clear. Already black women and other women of color are hit the hardest by the anti-abortion restrictions that are already in effect. Mississippi is a state with one abortion clinic. In the entire state, 80% of the women who need to go to that clinic are black. Black women live disproportionately in poverty, have disproportionately poor access to sex education, decent birth control, and basic health overall. They need abortion at higher rates because of this. They are disproportionately impacted when abortion is taken away. And then they're demonized on top of this. They are told that they are carrying out genocide against black babies for deciding for themselves when and whether to have children. This is a lie. It is a racist lie. And it is a shame and a weight put on black women that is especially vicious. And if women are forced to have children against their will, black women face death in childbirth at a rate of 2 to 3 times higher than white women. So let's not pretend. This issue hits all women. It hits all women, from the top of society all the way down to the bottom and everywhere in between. But it hits black women at every part of this society, and other women of color especially hard. So another thing that comes up that I want to speak to, and it's concentrated in a sign that sometimes you see at pro-choice or abortion rights protests or even other protests, and it's often held by women of a certain age. And it's a good sign. And they have the sign, you've probably seen it, that says, "I can't believe I'm still having to fight this shit." And I wanted to bring this up because it raises the question, why are we still having to fight this shit? 50 years, almost 50 years after the right to abortion was won. Now, the full answer to this question goes beyond what I have time to get into in the scope of tonight's presentation, but I want to say just a couple of things. First, this woman-hating fascist assault is rooted in the very system we live under, the system of capitalism imperialism. And this system has patriarchy, that is, the oppression of women by men, woven into its fabric and foundation. And ending this oppression, finally breaking all the chains that bind women and all the chains on humanity, is going to take overthrowing this system, a real revolution. Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader and architect of the new communism, has done path-breaking work and advanced humanity's understanding on scientifically understanding why and how this is so. And Bob Avakian, BA, has also brought forward a strategy to make this revolution. And he's forged, as Emma said before, a concrete vision and blueprint for a new socialist society, a far better liberating society that would replace this one after the revolution. And Bob Avakian is actively leading now in advancing the fight for revolution in this era. And here I want to read something that is a hallmark from Bob Avakian and his work. It's from his book, Basics. And it gets to the heart of what this whole question involves. It's Basics 322. It's a great book. You should get it. You cannot break all the chains except one. You cannot say you want to be free of exploitation and oppression, except you want to keep the oppression of women by men. You cannot say you want to liberate humanity, yet keep one half the people enslaved to the other half. The oppression of women is completely bound up with the division of society into masters and slaves, exploiters and exploited. And the ending of all such conditions is impossible without the complete liberation of women. All this is why women have a tremendous role to play, not only in making revolution, but in making sure it is all the way revolution. The fury of women can and must be fully unleashed as a mighty force for proletarian revolution. So tonight, and as we go forward in this struggle, which I am challenging and counting on each and every person listening tonight to become part of, I am going to invite and challenge you to dig into the work that Bob Avakian has done, to go to the website revcom.us and get into this and other works he's put out, and to read revcom.us and watch the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, which I co-host with Andy Z every week, where I and other followers of Bob Avakian bring alive and dig into the burning question of the liberation of women and the fight around abortion, as well as other burning questions of the revolution every single week. Get into it. It's at youtube.com/therevcom. Subscribe. But as I do this, I'm also going to fight to unite everybody very broadly. Unite all who can possibly be united in this fight. People from very different political perspectives and outlooks, including people who don't share my revolutionary outlook, and even people who are opposed to it. And I think you need to do this too. We need to take this fight to defeat this juggernaut of female enslavement that is rolling towards women in this country, and it will radiate around the world. We need to take this fight out and recruit people into it everywhere, far beyond the so-called movement. There are millions and millions of women at all levels and in all sections of this society whose positions and accomplishments or mere survival has hinged on access to abortion. We need to fight to get the RiseUpForAbortionRights.org statement out all over society. And we need to use every day between now and March 8th to build for and organize people to come out and fill the streets on March 8th, International Women's Day. Here in New York City, it will be 3 p.m. at Union Square, and there's other rallies being planned around the country, and we need to turn this city out. We need to be there and gather others to declare we refuse to let the U.S. Supreme Court deny women's humanity and decimate their rights. Abortion on demand and without apology. We need to fight to make these protests so massive, so determined, and so filled with the fury of people who refuse to bow down that they are powerful enough to wake up and shake millions more people, to then join us in the streets in even greater numbers in the days and weeks to come. We need campuses walking out. We need people speaking out in the arts and the sciences. We need to be filling the streets, not once in a symbolic protest and go home, but relentlessly and in growing numbers until we make clear to the fascists on the Supreme Court and everywhere else throughout society that if you try to take this right away, your society will be prevented from functioning at all. So like Lori Sokol said in the video that we began with, if not now, when? And if not you, who? And don't tell yourself it cannot be done. Look down in Mexico. Look at the fury and the fierceness of the women who stood up relentlessly, over and over and over again, pouring forward their outrage and their refusal to submit to the criminalization of abortion, and watch how that fell. Or look down in Argentina, again, thousands and thousands of women stood up again and again and again in the face of repression. They rocked their society and they inspired the world, and they won the right to abortion last year. And look in Poland as well, where some of the most heroic, courageous women have stood up and rocked that society, filled the streets with fury, defied the church and the state. And no, they haven't won yet. But that fight is not over, and because they are standing up, there is still a chance to win it. Now is the time. I want to close with the words from the Rise Up for Abortion Rights statement. Now is the time to hold nothing back. Now is the time to rouse thousands and soon millions in struggle so that we can look every woman and girl in the eye with the promise, in word and deed, that they will have a future as full human beings, not incubators. Now is the time to stand up together as if our lives depended on it, for in fact they do. Let us rise together. Let us refuse to let the Supreme Court deny women's humanity and decimate their rights. Let's fight and demand abortion on demand and without apology.